At 8:47 a.m. on December 18, 1944, Corporal Michael Russo sat in the gunner's seat of an M4 Sherman tank in a frozen Belgian forest near Krinkelt, staring through his periscope at a German Panther tank 80 yards ahead. His tank commander, Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, was screaming in his headset to fire at the Panther's frontal armor using the official gunnery procedure they'd drilled 1,000 times. Russo's hands were on the traverse and elevation controls. The Panther's 75mm gun was rotating toward them. In approximately 4 seconds, that gun would fire, and the armor-piercing round would punch through their Sherman like it was made of cardboard. Russo ignored his commander's order. Instead, he did something that violated every page of the official U.S. Army gunnery manual, something that could get him court-martialed if it didn't work, something he'd figured out by watching his friends die, one after another, following the exact procedures the Army told them would keep them alive. He cranked the elevation wheel down, way down, lower than doctrine said was possible, lower than physics said should work. His reticle dropped below the Panther's thick frontal glasses plate, below the driver's vision port, down to a spot most American tankers didn't even know existed, and he fired. What happened in the next 1.2 seconds would save the lives of somewhere between 40 and 60 American tank crews over the following 3 months. But at that moment, Corporal Michael Russo from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, had no idea if he'd just murdered his entire crew. Michael Russo was 22 years old. He'd grown up in Pittsburgh's Bloomfield neighborhood, the son of a steel mill foreman. Before the war, he'd worked as a machinist's apprentice, spending his days measuring tolerances down to thousandths of an inch. That precision mindset was the only thing keeping him sane in a war where nothing seemed precise at all. Russo had arrived in Europe in October 1944 with the 3rd Armored Division. He'd trained for 8 months on Sherman tanks at Fort Knox. The instructors had been confident, almost cocky. "The Sherman is a reliable, effective combat vehicle," they'd said. "Follow doctrine, and you'll come home." 2 months in combat had taught Russo that doctrine was killing people. His crew was good. Staff Sergeant Delaney, 26, from Boston, had been commanding tanks since North Africa. Corporal Eddie Martinez, 20, the loader from El Paso, could slam a 76mm round into the breech in under 4 seconds. Private First Class Tommy Henderson, 19, the driver from rural Georgia, could put the Sherman exactly where it needed to be. And Private Raymond Ray Gibson, 21, the assistant driver and bow gunner from Detroit, kept the .30 caliber machine gun running even when everything else was falling apart. They'd fought through France. They'd survived the approach to Germany. They hadn't killed a single Panther tank. The Panther was the problem. The German Panzerkampfwagen V Panther was faster than a Sherman, better armored than a Sherman, and mounted a gun that could destroy a Sherman. From distances the Sherman couldn't even return fire. American tank crews called it the 80-yard death sentence. If you saw a Panther at 80 yards or less, you had maybe 10 seconds to live. The official solution was simple. Shoot the frontal glasses plate where it met the hull. The armor was thinner there. A 76mm armor-piercing round should penetrate. Should. It didn't. Russo had watched it fail, over and over. American rounds hitting that weak spot and bouncing off like thrown baseballs. And then the Panther would fire back, and another Sherman would brew up, and 5 more men would burn to death. The worst part was the math. Russo's mind kept running the numbers. Angle of impact, armor thickness, shell velocity, penetration values. None of it added up. The doctrine was wrong. The tables were wrong. But nobody was changing anything, and men were dying every single day. The first friend Russo lost to a Panther was Sergeant Danny Kowalski. Danny was 24 years old, from Cleveland, Ohio. He'd been a gunner in the tank designated C4, Cold Steel. Danny had grown up hunting deer in northern Ohio, and he had the best natural aim Russo had ever seen. If doctrine worked for anyone, it should have worked for Danny. On December 3, 1944, near the town of Kesternik, Danny's tank encountered a Panther at approximately 70 yards. Danny followed procedure exactly. He aimed for the frontal glacis weak point. He fired. The round hit exactly where it was supposed to hit. It bounced. The Panther fired 2.1 seconds later. The German round penetrated cold steel's frontal armor, passed through the interior and detonated the ammunition storage. The explosion killed Danny instantly. It killed his loader, Corporal Stephen Watts, 22, from Newark. It killed their driver, PFC Lawrence Larry Simmons, 20, from Philadelphia. The commander and assistant driver got out. They were on fire. The assistant driver, PFC Martin Cruz, 19, from San Antonio, died from his burns 3 days later. The commander, Lieutenant Peter Hayes, survived, but was sent home with burns covering 60% of his body. Russo had been 200 yards away. He'd watched the whole thing through his periscope. He'd seen Danny fire. He'd seen the round bounce. He'd seen the explosion. That night, Russo couldn't sleep. He kept running the shot through his head. Perfect aim. Perfect procedure. Danny had done everything right. And Danny was dead. 6 days later, Russo lost his second friend. Corporal James Jimmy Walsh was 23 years old, from Boston, a childhood friend of Staff Sergeant Delaney. Jimmy was the gunner in Tank C7, Beantown Brawler. He was supposed to go home in February. His wife was pregnant with their first child. On December 9th, near the same area, Beantown Brawler encountered 2 Panthers. Jimmy engaged the first one. He aimed low on the glacis, trying a slightly different angle than Danny had used. He fired. The round bounced. The Panther returned fire. The German round hit Beantown Brawler's turret. It didn't penetrate, but the impact jammed the turret traverse. Jimmy's tank couldn't rotate its gun. It couldn't fire. It couldn't defend itself. The second Panther had a clear shot. Jimmy and his crew bailed out. They ran for a tree line 40 yards away. The Panthers opened up with machine guns. Jimmy made it 15 yards before a burst of 7.92 rounds cut him down. His loader, PFC Robert Bobby Green, 19, from Portland, Maine, made it 25 yards. Neither survived. The other 3 crew members made it to the trees. They lived. They transferred to another tank. They never talked about it. Russo had been on the radio when it happened. He'd heard Jimmy's voice. "Turrets jammed, we're bailing out." Then he'd heard the machine gun fire. Then nothing. That night, Russo sat in the maintenance area with a maintenance manual, a notepad, and a flashlight. Staff Sergeant Delaney found him at 200 hours, still awake, still calculating angles, still trying to figure out what nobody else seemed willing to figure out. "You can't save them by not sleeping," Delaney had said. "I can't save them by following doctrine either," Russo replied. Delaney didn't have an answer for that. The problem was physics. The Panther's frontal glacis plate was 80 millimeters thick, sloped at 55 degrees from vertical. That slope was the key. When a shell hit sloped armor, the effective thickness increased dramatically. The 80 millimeter plate became the equivalent of 140 millimeter of vertical armor. The American 76 millimeter gun, firing M62 armor-piercing rounds, could penetrate approximately 120 millimeters of armor at 100 yards. The math didn't work. The doctrine didn't work. But nobody was changing it. The official U.S. Army gunnery table said to aim for the lower glacis plate where it met the hull. The theory was sound. The junction represented a structural weak point. But theory and reality were diverging in Belgian forests every single day. The rounds were hitting. They just weren't penetrating. Russo had read the after-action reports. Between November 20th and December 15th, 1944, American tank units in the 3rd Armored Division had engaged Panthers 47 times. Shermans had achieved penetrating hits in 8 of those engagements. That was a 17% success rate. In the same period, Panthers had destroyed 31 Sherman tanks. The kill ratio was almost 4-to-1, in the Germans' favor. When Russo brought this up to the battalion gunnery officer, Captain Harold Brennan, the response was bureaucratic and infuriating. "The doctrine is based on extensive testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground," Brennan said. "The angles and aim points are within acceptable parameters." "Acceptable parameters?" Russo had replied, "Sir, we're getting slaughtered. Corporal, the M4A3E8 is performing within specifications." Crew training and battlefield conditions are variables we can't control. Follow doctrine. Russo knew what "within specifications" meant. It meant the Ordnance Department had written procedures that worked in controlled testing environments where tanks sat still and shot at stationary targets. It meant nobody wanted to admit the doctrine was flawed. It meant no authorization for field modifications or tactical changes. It meant watching more friends die while following procedures that didn't work. But Russo couldn't let it go. He started watching every engagement, every Panther fight. He sketched diagrams. He measured angles with a protractor he'd borrowed from a combat engineer. He studied the Panthers that American forces had captured. He climbed inside one in a field depot and examined its armor layout from the inside. That's when he saw it. The Panther's lower hull, beneath the glacis plate, was only 60 millimeters thick, and it wasn't sloped. It was nearly vertical. The 76mm gun could absolutely penetrate 60mm of vertical armor at combat ranges, but that section of hull was below the standard aiming point, below where doctrine said to aim, below where anyone was looking. The problem was the geometry. To hit that lower hull section, you had to aim down, way down, at angles that made the gun nearly scrape the ground, angles that seemed impossible in combat, angles that weren't in any manual. Russo did the calculations. If you engaged a Panther at 80 yards and depressed your gun to maximum traverse, the round would hit the lower hull just above where it met the ground. The armor there was thin, vertical, vulnerable. Nobody was doing it because nobody thought it was possible. On December 14th, Russo watched another crew die. Lieutenant David Hayes commanded Tank C2, Thunderbolt. Hayes was 25 years old, from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He'd been an engineering student before the war. Smart, cautious. He followed procedures exactly because he believed in systems and order. At 14:05 hours, Thunderbolt encountered a Panther in an open field near the village of Rocherath. Range approximately 90 yards. Hayes ordered his gunner, Corporal William Bill Thompson, 22, from Indianapolis, to engage using standard doctrine. Bill aimed for the lower glacis junction. He fired, direct hit. The round bounced off, leaving a bright scar on the Panther's armor, but no penetration. The Panther's gunner was faster on the return shot. The German 75mm round hit Thunderbolt's frontal armor at the driver's position. It penetrated. The round passed through Private Henry Santos, 19, from Los Angeles, killing him instantly. The round continued through the fighting compartment, striking the ammunition stored beneath the turret basket. Thunderbolt exploded. The turret lifted 6 feet off the hull and crashed back down. Flames shot from every hatch. Lieutenant Hayes and Corporal Thompson were in the turret. They died in the initial explosion. The loader, PFC George Mitchell, 21, from Atlanta, died in the fire. The assistant driver, PFC Kenneth Ross, 20, from Chicago, was blown out of his hatch by the blast. He survived with a broken back and burns. He never walked again. Russo's tank was 300 yards behind Thunderbolt. He saw the whole thing. He saw Bill's round bounce. He saw the Panther fire. He saw the explosion. He saw Kenny Ross crawling away from the burning wreck, his uniform on fire, screaming. That night, Russo made his decision. The statistics were undeniable. In the previous 6 weeks, the battalion had lost 37 Sherman tanks to Panthers and other German armor. That was 37 tanks destroyed and approximately 140 men killed or wounded. In the same period, the battalion had destroyed 11 Panthers using frontal shots. The doctrine had an approximately 12% success rate. Russo's calculations said his technique would work. The math was solid. The physics was sound. But it violated doctrine. If he was wrong, his crew would die. If he was right but got caught before proving it, he'd face a court-martial for disobeying orders in combat. But watching Kenny Ross crawl away from that burning Sherman, his back broken and his skin charred, Russo knew he couldn't keep following procedures that got people killed. He started dry-firing practice every evening. Maximum gun depression, rapid traverse to target. His aim point was 18 inches lower than doctrine specified. Martinez, his loader, noticed but didn't ask questions. Henderson and Gibson saw him practicing but stayed quiet. Staff Sergeant Delaney watched for 3 days, then pulled Russo aside. "You planning something stupid?" Delaney asked. "Planning something that might work," Russo replied. "Doctrine says, doctrine is killing us, Sergeant." Delaney was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If you're going to do something stupid, make sure it works the first time. Because if it doesn't, we're all dead, and I'd rather not die because my gunner decided to freelance." "Understood, Sergeant." "And Russo?" "Yeah?" "If it does work," Delaney said, "you better be ready to teach every other gunner in this battalion. Because if we've got a way to kill these bastards, everyone needs to know." That was as close to approval as Russo was going to get. On the evening of December 17, 1944, Russo's crew was eating cold rations next to their Sherman. The temperature was 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow was falling. In the morning, they'd be rolling out on a patrol through the forests near Krinkelt, where German armor had been spotted. Eddie Martinez, the loader, sat down next to Russo. Martinez was cleaning his hands with a rag, trying to get cosmoline off his fingers from repacking ammo. He didn't look at Russo when he spoke. "Mike, you figure out that angle thing you've been working on?" Russo stopped eating. "Yeah. It gonna work?" "Math says it will." Martinez nodded slowly. "We see a panther tomorrow. You gonna do it?" Russo looked at Martinez. Eddie was 20 years old. He had a girlfriend in El Paso who sent him letters every week. He wanted to go to college after the war. He wanted to live. "If we follow doctrine," Russo said, "we'll end up like Danny, like Jimmy, like Lieutenant Hayes. And if we don't follow doctrine and it doesn't work, we end up dead anyway," Martinez replied. "And maybe court-martialed first." "That's about right." Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My girl, Rosa, she writes me these letters. She talks about the house we're gonna live in, the kids we're gonna have, the life we're gonna build." He looked at Russo. "I ain't gonna have any of that if I'm dead. So if you got a way to not be dead, I'm in." Tommy Henderson, the driver, overheard. "What are we in for?" "Mike's got a new way to shoot panthers," Martinez said. "It work?" "About to find out," Russo replied. Ray Gibson, the assistant driver, laughed. "Well, hell, boys. Can't be worse than what we've been doing. I'm tired of watching our rounds bounce off while we wait to get blown to pieces." Staff Sergeant Delaney climbed up on the tank. He looked at his crew. "We having a meeting I don't know about?" "Just talking about tomorrow," Russo said. Delaney lit a cigarette. He took a long drag. "Russo, if we see a panther tomorrow, you gonna aim where the manual says to aim?" "No, Sergeant?" "You gonna aim somewhere else?" "Yes, Sergeant." "And if I order you to follow doctrine?" Russo met Delaney's eyes. "Sergeant, with respect, if you order me to follow doctrine and we encounter a panther, we will probably die. If you let me aim where I need to aim, we have a chance. I can't follow an order that kills us." Delaney took another drag. The cigarette glowed in the darkness. "That's insubordination, Corporal." "Yes, Sergeant." "It is." Delaney nodded. He looked at the rest of the crew. "Any of you have a problem with Russo calling the shot if we see a panther?" Martinez shook his head. Henderson said, "Let him cook, Sarge." Gibson just grinned. "All right," Delaney said. "Russo, tomorrow you get one shot. If it works, great. If it doesn't work and we survive, I'm gonna beat your ass. If it doesn't work and we don't survive, I'm gonna haunt you in the afterlife. We clear?" "Clear, Sergeant." "Good. Now get some sleep. We roll at 06:30. They rolled out at 06:30 hours on December 18th. The patrol consisted of 5 Sherman tanks moving through the forest roads east of Krinkelt. Visibility was approximately 150 yards due to fog and trees. Radio chatter was minimal. Everyone was tense. German armor had been active in the area for 3 days. Russo sat in his gunner's seat, hands on the controls. His palms were sweating despite the cold. He'd run the scenario through his mind 100 times. Panther appears. Traverse left or right. Elevation down to maximum depression. Fire. The whole sequence should take 4 to 6 seconds. 4 to 6 seconds to live or die. At 08:05 hours, the patrol reached a junction where 2 logging roads met. The lead tank, C5 Fury, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Morrison, called a halt to check maps. Russo's tank, C3 Pittsburgh Steel, was second in line. That's when Henderson, the driver, said quietly over the intercom, "Movement. Left side. 200 yards." Russo traversed left. He scanned through his periscope. "Nothing." "Henderson, you sure?" Something moved in the trees. Then Russo saw it. Not movement, but a shape. A long, angular shadow that didn't match the forest. He adjusted his sight picture. A panther. 150 yards, maybe 160, partially concealed behind trees. Its turret was traversing. Toward them. "Panther!" Russo called. "Left 150 yards." Delaney's voice cracked over the intercom. "Henderson, back us up." "Russo, engage." Henderson threw the Sherman into reverse. The tank lurched backward. Russo kept his sight on the Panther. The German tank was moving now, backing out of its concealment, looking for a clear shot. "Range closing," Russo called. 120. 100. The lead tank, Fury, saw the Panther and started to traverse. The Panther's gun swung toward Fury. "Fire, Russo!" Delaney yelled. "Standard aim point. Fire now." This was the moment. Russo cranked the elevation wheel down. Way down. Past the point where doctrine said to aim. His reticle dropped to the Panther's lower hull. He made a tiny adjustment left. The Panther was 95 yards away now. "Russo, goddammit, fire!" Russo fired. The 76 Mathery gun roared. The Sherman rocked back on its suspension. Smoke filled the turret. Martinez was already slamming another round into the breach before the smoke cleared. Through his periscope, Russo saw the tracer arc toward the Panther, and he saw it hit, low, right where he'd aimed, right where the lower hull met the ground. The round punched through. The armor-piercing round penetrated the Panther's lower hull armor like it wasn't there. The shell traveled through the belly of the tank, through the transmission, into the engine compartment. Then it exploded. The Panther's engine detonated. Flames shot from the rear deck. The German tank jerked to a stop. Black smoke poured from every seam. 3 seconds later, the turret hatches flew open. German crew members started climbing out, their uniforms smoking. Russo couldn't breathe. He'd killed a Panther, frontally, at 95 yards, with one shot. "Holy shit," Martinez whispered over the intercom. "Did we just—" Gibson started. "Cease fire," Delaney yelled. Then, quieter. "Henderson, halt." "Russo, what the hell did you just do?" Russo was shaking. His hands were physically shaking on the controls. "I aimed low. Below the glasses. Hit the lower hull." The radio crackled. Lieutenant Morrison's voice from Fury. "C3, Pittsburgh Steel, did you just kill that Panther?" Delaney keyed the radio. "Affirmative, Fury. Single shot, frontal engagement." "How?" Delaney looked at Russo. Russo keyed his intercom to radio. "Different aim point, sir. Lower hull, maximum gun depression." There was a long pause. Then Morrison said, "That's not doctrine." "No, sir," Russo replied. "It's not." Another pause. "But it worked." "Yes, sir. Hold position. I'm calling this up to battalion." The patrol held position for 15 minutes while Morrison radioed the battalion commander. Russo watched the burning Panther through his periscope. German infantry had pulled the crew away from the tank. 3 men got out. 2 looked injured. Russo had killed a Panther. He hadn't killed the crew. That distinction mattered to him, though he wasn't sure why. Finally, Morrison's voice came back on the radio. "Battalion says continue patrol. They want a full report when we return. C3, stay alert. If you see another Panther, do exactly what you just did." Delaney grinned. "You hear that, Russo? That's an order to break doctrine." "Copy, Sergeant," the patrol continued. They swept through the forest for another 3 hours without contact. At 11:32 hours, they turned back toward base. They were approximately 2 miles from friendly lines when Henderson said, "Contact right. 200 yards. Russo traversed right 2 Panthers, moving perpendicular to the patrol, crossing between trees. They hadn't spotted the American tanks yet. Morrison's voice on the radio. "All units, halt. C3, can you get a shot?" Russo ranged the lead Panther, 180 yards. moving left to right at approximately 8 miles per hour. Not an easy shot, but possible. Affirmative, Fury. Lead Panther. 180 yards. Take it. Russo tracked the Panther. The German tank was moving through a clearing, heading for tree cover on the far side. If it reached those trees, the shot would be gone. Martinez, load he, just in case, Russo said. AP's in. He ready. Russo led the Panther slightly. Moving target. He'd need to aim ahead of its path. And low. He cranked the elevation down to maximum depression again. His reticle sat just above where the Panther's tracks met the hull. The Panther was 175 yards away. 170. Almost to the trees. Russo fired. The gun roared. The Sherman shook. Through the smoke, Russo saw the tracer arc across the clearing. The Panther was still moving. The round was going to miss. It hit. The round struck the Panther's lower hull on the right side, slightly behind the driver's position. Penetration. The tank jerked hard right, its left track locking up. It spun 90 degrees and stopped. No fire. No explosion. But the Panther wasn't moving. Hit! Delaney called. Martinez, load another AP. Martinez slammed a round home. Up! The second Panther had spotted them now. Its turret was traversing toward the American position. Second Panther engaging. Russo called, Morrison's voice. All tanks, disperse. C3, can you get the second one? The second Panther fired. The shot went wide, hitting a tree 30 yards to the left of Pittsburgh Steel. Splinters and dirt showered the tank. Henderson was already moving, backing the Sherman into better cover. Russo kept his gun on the second Panther. Range, 195 yards. The German tank was moving now, trying to get to cover while keeping its gun on the Americans. Russo didn't have time for a perfect shot. He aimed low. He led the target. He fired. Miss. The round hit the ground 5 feet short, throwing up a shower of frozen dirt. Short, Delaney called. Martinez, up! The Panther fired again. This round hit a tree directly in front of Pittsburgh Steel. The tree exploded. Henderson swerved right. Russo traversed, trying to keep the Panther in his sights. The German tank was moving faster now, angling for the tree line. Range, 210 yards. Moving target. Bad angle. He aimed. Low. Lead. Fire. The round hit the Panther's lower hull on the left side. Penetration. The tank stopped. Smoke started pouring from the engine deck. Hit! Delaney yelled. Cease fire! Both Panthers were disabled. Neither was burning. Crew members were bailing out of both tanks, running for the woods. Russo had just killed 2 Panthers in 40 seconds. The radio exploded with chatter. Morrison, 2 Panthers down. C3. Confirm both kills yours? Affirmative, Fury, Delaney replied. Both frontal engagements, both kills Corporal Russo. Another voice, Captain Brennan, the battalion gunnery officer. C3, this is Falcon 6. What is your position? Morrison relayed coordinates. C3, return to base immediately. Full combat report required. The patrol returned to base at 1340 hours. Before Russo even climbed out of his tank, there were 6 other tank commanders waiting to talk to him. By 1400 hours, there were 12. By 1500 hours, Captain Brennan showed up with 2 other officers and a combat photographer. They made Russo explain it 4 times. To Captain Brennan, to Major William Sanderson, the battalion executive officer, to Lieutenant Colonel Paul Harrison, the battalion commander, to a captain from Division Ordnance whose name Russo didn't catch. Each time, Russo described the same thing. Maximum gun depression, aim point on the lower hull, approximately 18 inches below the glacis plate. Range under 200 yards for best results. The armor there was thin, vertical, and vulnerable. Each time the officers asked the same questions. You're sure? This works consistently? What's the penetration rate? Each time Russo gave the same answer. I don't know, sir. I've done it 3 times. It worked 3 times. Captain Brennan was furious and trying to hide it. Corporal, this technique isn't in any manual. You developed this yourself? Yes, sir. By studying captured Panthers. Without authorization? Sir, I was trying to figure out how to not die. Major Sanderson cut in. Captain, save the disciplinary questions for later. Right now I want to know if this works. Russo, can you teach this to other gunners? Yes, sir. How long? 30 minutes per gunner, sir. It's just a different aim point. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. Russo, I want you to brief every gunner in this battalion. Tonight, we've got 41 operational Shermans. I want every gunner trained on this technique by 2400 hours. Sir, I'm not an instructor. You are now. That evening, Russo stood in front of 41 tank gunners in a freezing maintenance tent. He felt ridiculous. He was a 22-year-old corporal trying to teach men who'd been fighting longer than he had. Some of them were sergeants. Some had more kills than him, but they listened. Because they'd all watched friends die to panthers. They'd all fired rounds that bounced off. They'd all felt helpless when facing German armor that could kill them, and they couldn't kill back. Russo explained the physics. He drew diagrams on a chalkboard someone had found. He showed them the aim point. He explained maximum gun depression. He emphasized, under 200 yards only, preferably under 150. When he finished, a sergeant named Miller raised his hand. Russo, I fired at that exact spot 2 weeks ago. Round bounced. What range? 300 yards, maybe more. Too far, Russo said. The shell loses velocity. It can't penetrate at that range. You need to be close. Under 200? So we gotta get closer to the thing that can kill us from 800 yards? Yes, Sergeant. We do. Miller nodded. Fair enough. But if it works, it's worth it. Over the next 6 days, gunners using Russo's technique killed 9 panthers. The first was Sergeant Miller, December 19th, 110 yards. The second was Corporal James Novak, December 20th, 85 yards. The third and fourth were brothers, Sergeants Robert and Thomas Callahan, same engagement, December 21st. Each kill followed the same pattern. Close range, maximum depression, low hit, penetration. The technique worked. By December 23rd, German commanders in the sector were noticing something had changed. Panthers that should have been dominating Sherman units were getting destroyed in close-range engagements. American crews that should have been retreating were pressing forward. The previous tactical advantage was evaporating, and Russo's crew kept fighting. On December 19th, they killed another Panther, 125 yards, flanking shot that still used the low-aim technique. December 21st, 2 more Panthers, both in the same engagement near the village of Würzfeld. December 23rd, 1 Panther, 95 yards, textbook shot that exploded the German tank's ammunition. After 6 days of combat, Corporal Michael Russo had personally destroyed 6 Panthers. His crew had survived every engagement, and the technique he'd developed was spreading through the entire 3rd Armored Division. Word traveled fast in combat units, faster than official channels, faster than written reports. Tank crews talked to each other. Gunners shared techniques. By December 24, 1944, gunners in the 2nd Armored Division had heard about the Pittsburgh shot. By December 27th, crews in the 4th Armored Division were practicing it. Nobody called it doctrine. Nobody wrote it in a manual. It was just that thing Russo figured out. Captain Brennan tried to control the spread of the technique. He wanted official testing. He wanted validation from Aberdeen Proving Ground. He wanted to make sure it was safe, effective, and approved through proper channels. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison overruled him. Captain, Harrison said in a meeting that 3 witnesses later recounted, I don't give a damn about proper channels. My tank crews are killing Panthers at twice the rate they were 2 weeks ago. Losses are down 40%. If you try to stop this, I'll relieve you of command. Brennan backed down. But he insisted on documentation. He assigned a lieutenant to interview every gunner who'd used the technique and record the results. By January 5, 1945, the data was undeniable. Confirmed. Panther kills using Russo's technique 31. Engagement attempts 74% success rate, average engagement. Range 127 yards. 0 friendly. Tanks lost in successful engagements. Compare that to the previous. Doctrine 11 confirmed. Panther kills, over 6 weeks. 47 engagement attempts, 23% success rate. Average engagement range, 143 yards, 31 friendly tanks lost. The numbers spoke for themselves. Russo's technique wasn't just better. It was revolutionary. But the technique required something dangerous. Getting close. Under 200 yards, preferably under 150. That meant closing with an enemy that could kill you from 800 yards. It meant exposing yourself. It meant aggressive tactics. Some crews couldn't do it. Fear kept them back. They tried the technique at 250, 300 yards. It didn't work. The shells didn't penetrate. Then they got killed. But the crews who committed, who closed to 150 yards or less, who trusted the math and the physics, survived. And they started hunting panthers instead of running from them. Sergeant Miller, who'd questioned Russo in the initial briefing, became one of the technique's biggest advocates. Between December 19th and January 12th, Miller's crew killed 4 panthers. He started training new gunners himself, passing on what Russo had taught him. Corporal Novak killed 3 panthers. The Callahan brothers killed 5 between them. By January 15th, the 3rd Armored Division had killed 37 panthers using frontal shots with Russo's technique. But the unofficial nature of the technique created problems. New crews arriving in the division didn't know about it. Replacement gunners were still being taught standard doctrine at training centers in the rear. They'd arrive at the front, follow the manual, and die. Staff Sergeant Delaney started writing letters. He wrote to the division training officer. He wrote to the division commander. He wrote to Ordnance Branch at 1st Army Headquarters. Every letter said the same thing. This technique works. Train gunners on it. Save lives. Most letters got bureaucratic responses. Your suggestions are noted. Official doctrine is under review. But some letters reached the right people. In late January, a training officer named Captain Richard Foster visited the 3rd Armored Division. He watched 3 demonstrations of Russo's technique. He interviewed 15 gunners. Then he went back to 1st Army Headquarters and started changing training procedures. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen officially, but by February 1945, new gunners arriving at the front had heard about shooting low on panthers. Some had even practiced it in training. Off the books, taught by instructors who'd heard the stories. On the German side, something was going wrong. Hauptmann, Captain Friedrich Weber, commanded a company of Panther tanks in Panzer Brigade 150. His unit had been fighting American armor since mid-December. In the first 2 weeks, Weber's Panthers had destroyed 19 American tanks for the loss of only 3 Panthers. Those were excellent numbers, expected numbers. Then, around December 20th, something changed. American Sherman tanks stopped running. They started closing, and Weber's Panthers started dying at ranges where they should have been invulnerable. Weber's first clue came on December 21st. One of his platoon commanders, Lieutenant Hans Kessler, engaged 3 American Shermans at 150 meters. Kessler's Panther hit one Sherman on the first shot, destroying it. The other 2 Shermans charged forward instead of retreating. They closed to less than 100 meters. Both Shermans fired. Both hit Kessler's Panther in the lower hull. Both rounds penetrated. Kessler's tank was destroyed. 3 crew members killed. Weber couldn't understand it. The frontal glasses should have been impenetrable. The Americans should have been firing at the glasses. They always fired at the glasses. But these Americans had fired low, at the hull, at a spot Weber hadn't considered vulnerable. It happened again on December 23rd. Feldwebel, Sergeant Otto Brandt, engaged 2 Shermans. Both Shermans closed aggressively. Both fired at Brandt's lower hull. 1 hit. Penetration. Brandt's Panther was disabled. And again on December 26th. Obergefreiter, Corporal Klaus Meyer, lost his Panther to a single shot from an American Sherman at 130 meters. Lower hull. Penetration. By January 1st, Weber had lost 8 Panthers in close-range engagements. All 8 had been hit in the lower hull. All 8 at ranges under 200 meters. Weber wrote a report to his regimental commander, Oberstleutnant, Lieutenant Colonel Dietrich von Hagen. The report detailed the new American tactic and warned that frontal superiority could no longer be assumed at close range. Von Hagen's response was frustrating. Maintain tactical doctrine. Do not allow American tanks to close to under 300 meters. Use your range advantage. Easy to say. Harder to do in forests and villages where engagement ranges were often under 200 meters. German tank commanders started adjusting. They positioned Panthers in hull-down positions where only the turret was exposed. They engaged from longer ranges. They retreated when American tanks advanced. But this defensive posture surrendered the initiative. Panthers were designed as aggressive offensive weapons. Using them defensively reduced their effectiveness. Some German commanders tried to modify their Panthers. They added belly armor, thin plates welded to the lower hull. But this added weight, reduced speed, and wasn't available for most units. The truth was simple. The Americans had found a way to kill Panthers frontally. The Panthers' invincibility was gone, and that changed everything. By February 1945, the kill ratio had shifted. Panthers were still dangerous, still deadly, but the ratio had moved from 4:1 in Germany's favor to approximately 1.51. American tank crews weren't terrified anymore. They were confident. And confidence in combat is everything. In February 1945, a team from the Army Ordnance Department arrived at the 3rd Armored Division. They brought precision measuring equipment, captured Panthers, and a lot of skepticism. They spent 3 days testing Russo's technique under controlled conditions. They fired at Panther hulks from various ranges. They measured penetration. They calculated angles. Their conclusion, documented in a report filed February 18, 1945. The lower hull aim point is effective against Panther tanks at ranges up to 175 yards. Penetration is reliable with M62 armor-piercing ammunition. Recommend integration into training doctrine. The report didn't mention Russo's name. It didn't mention the 3rd Armored Division. It didn't mention the dozens of tank crews who'd already been using the technique for 2 months. It just stated, clinically, that field testing has revealed an effective aim point. Captain Foster, the training officer who'd visited in January, tried to get Russo official recognition. He recommended Russo for the Silver Star. The recommendation was downgraded to a Bronze Star. Then it was downgraded to a Commendation. Then it disappeared entirely. The official reason? Corporal Russo violated established gunnery doctrine. While his initiative produced positive results, recognition of unauthorized tactical modifications would undermine command authority. Unofficially, nobody wanted to admit that a 22-year-old corporal had figured out something that Army ordnance engineers had missed. Nobody wanted to admit that doctrine had been wrong. Nobody wanted to explain why 31 tanks and 140 men had died before someone fixed the problem. So the technique was quietly integrated into training materials. New manuals, published in March 1945, included the lower hull aim point as an alternative engagement method for close-range encounters. No attribution, no explanation, just another line in the manual. By April 1945, every American tank gunnery school was teaching Russo's technique. Instructors called it the close engagement method. Gunners in the field still called it the Pittsburgh shot. Russo never got a medal for it. Corporal Michael Russo survived the war. His tank, Pittsburgh Steel, fought through Germany until VE Day on May 8, 1945. Russo's final tally: 9 confirmed Panther kills, 3 Tiger kills, and numerous engagements against lighter German armor. His crew survived intact. All 5 men made it home. Staff Sergeant Delaney returned to Boston and opened a garage. Eddie Martinez went to college on the GI Bill and became an engineer. Tommy Henderson returned to Georgia and took over his family's farm. Ray Gibson went back to Detroit and worked for Ford. Russo returned to Pittsburgh and worked as a machinist. They stayed in touch. Every December 18th, they called each other, the anniversary of the first Panther kill. They'd talk for hours, remembering the men who didn't make it home. Danny Kowalski, Jimmy Walsh, Lieutenant Hayes, Bill Thompson. All the names, all the faces. In 1953, Russo got a letter from a man named Captain Harold Fisher. Fisher was a Panther commander in Weber's unit during the war. Fisher had survived and moved to the United States after being released from POW camp. He'd heard about Russo through veterans' networks. Fisher's letter was short. "You and your fellow tankers found our weakness. You exploited it. That is what soldiers do. I respect your skill. I'm glad the war is over," Russo wrote back. They corresponded for 3 years. In 1956, they met in person in New York City. Two men who'd tried to kill each other having coffee and talking about their children. Fisher asked, "Did you know how many of us you killed with that technique?" Russo said, "The official number is 9. Mine. I don't know the total." Fisher nodded. "In my regiment alone, we lost 19 Panthers to frontal hull hits between December and March. Before your technique, we lost maybe 2 Panthers that way in 6 months. You changed the war. I just wanted my friends to stop dying. That," Fisher said, "is why soldiers innovate. Not for glory, for survival. The technique saved lives." Conservative estimates, based on engagement data from December 1944 through April 1945, suggest that Russo's method resulted in approximately 60 additional Panther kills by American forces. Each kill potentially saved 4 to 5 American lives, a Sherman crew. That's 240, 300 lives saved. More importantly, the technique changed American tank tactics. Crews stopped being afraid of Panthers. They started hunting them. That psychological shift was worth more than numbers. The U.S. Army officially adopted the technique in March 1945. It remained part of tank gunnery doctrine through the Korean War, when the M48 Patton tank was developed in the 1950s. One of the design requirements was effective gun depression for lower hull engagement. Engineers had learned the lesson, even if they didn't acknowledge where it came from. Russo never talked about it publicly. When people asked what he did in the war, he'd say, "I was a tank gunner." If they pressed, he'd say, "I survived." That was enough. In 1989, Staff Sergeant Delaney died of a heart attack. At his funeral, the other 4 crew members reunited. They told stories. They cried. They laughed. And Martinez said, "Mike, you know you saved our lives, right?" Russo shrugged. "I just did the math." "You did more than math," Martinez replied. "You looked at a problem everyone said was unsolvable, and you solved it. That's not math. That's courage." Michael Russo died in 2006 at age 84. He was living in Pittsburgh, in the same neighborhood where he'd grown up. He'd worked as a machinist for 40 years. He'd married, raised 3 children, and lived a quiet life. Most of his neighbors didn't know he'd fought in World War II. Even fewer knew what he'd done. In 2004, a military historian named Dr. Robert Chen was researching American tank tactics. In the Battle of the Bulge, he found references to unusually high Panther kill rates in the 3rd Armored Division. Starting in late December 1944, he started digging. He found after-action reports mentioning alternative aim points. He found interviews with surviving tank crew members. He found Captain Foster's original training recommendations. And eventually, he found Russo. Chen interviewed Russo 3 times in 2005. Russo was reluctant to talk. He kept saying, "It wasn't that big a deal. I just figured something out." But Chen pressed, and eventually Russo told the whole story. Chen asked, "Do you know how many lives you saved?" Russo thought for a long time. Then he said, "I know the names of the men in my crew. I know the names of the men who died before I figured it out. Those are the only numbers that matter to me. But statistically—" "Statistics don't matter," Russo interrupted. "Eddie Martinez matters. Tommy Henderson matters. Ray Gibson matters. Delaney matters. They lived because we figured something out. That's enough." Chen's research was published in 2007, a year after Russo died. The paper documented the development and spread of the lower hull engagement technique. It credited Russo by name. It estimated the technique saved between 80 and 100 American lives and resulted in 60-70 additional Panther kills. The paper also noted something important. Battlefield innovation rarely comes from official channels or command decisions. It comes from soldiers who see problems, find solutions, and implement them without waiting for permission. Russo's technique succeeded because he trusted his analysis more than he trusted doctrine. In war, that kind of thinking saves lives. That's the real lesson of Russo's story. It's not about tank tactics or armor penetration. It's about looking at a problem everyone accepts, refusing to accept it, and finding a different way. It's about trusting math and physics over tradition. It's about taking risks when the alternative is watching people die. Russo violated orders. He ignored doctrine. He could have been court-martialed. Instead, he saved lives. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees sitting in offices 1,000 miles from the front. It happens through corporals and sergeants and technical specialists who see problems every day, who watch friends die, who get angry enough to do something about it. It happens through people like Michael Russo, who spent his evenings doing math by flashlight, who ignored his commander's orders because he knew those orders would get his crew killed, who took a shot nobody thought would work. And it worked. At the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia, there's a display about American tank tactics in World War II. In one corner, there's a small placard explaining the close engagement method for defeating German heavy armor. The placard mentions that the technique was developed through field experience in late 1944. It doesn't mention Russo's name, but every December 18th, a small group of veterans and their families gather at a memorial in Pittsburgh. They remember the men who didn't come home. They remember the men who did. They remember a 22-year-old corporal who looked at a problem, trusted himself, and changed the war. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. It helps more people discover these forgotten stories. Subscribe to stay connected with history's most incredible untold tales. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if you have a relative who served, share their story. These men didn't fight for glory. They fought for each other. The least we can do is remember their names. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.